due parole di... ci siamo qua? Sì. Due parole diciamo di servizio. Il panel che si svolgerà adesso si svolgerà in lingua inglese. Chi ha bisogno di un aiuto per seguire quanto viene detto, ci sono due amiche professioniste della traduzione che ci aiutano lì in quella parte della sala, e quindi ci si può, diciamo, sedere da quella parte in modo che si può ottenere la traduzione di quello che viene detto. Grazie.
Chi ha bisogno appunto lì, grazie.
I take only 1 minute, maybe two probably, of your time. I start already speaking in English exactly because of this reason. If you need translation, se ha bisogno di traduzione verso l'italiano può andare in fondo. Just a very brief word. This panel... allora è meglio questo. Molto brevemente, un benvenuto a questo panel. No, in English. This is a welcome from the Robert Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights to this panel, which we are very happy that it is organized within the framework of the Internet Festival. So we are very grateful that we are able to have this panel today. Which sees the participation of a number of persons that have been working with the Robert Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights for several years. And I want just to spend a few seconds, a few words on what the Robert Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights is actually. We are a human rights organization. We are based in the United States, except for the fact that we are also based in Florence. So outside of the United States, we are only based in Florence, so very nearby. And our mission is to advance the human rights situation on a global scale. One of the main threads of our work is working with what we call the defenders of human rights, on which and in that framework, we have two persons that are participating in this panel. They will be introduced later. Because we think that individuals, that's of course coming forth out of the ideas and the work of Robert Kennedy, is that the individuals can make a difference, especially if individuals are joined by other individuals. So it's the individual that can make a difference. So that's why we heavily invest in individuals that are trying to change the human rights situation in their country, in their context. And this can be on women's rights, on the freedom of press, it can be on honor killings, it can be on any type of human rights violation, any type of human rights problem anywhere in the world. So that's one part of our program. Another part of our program is teaching human rights in schools, in high schools, in elementary schools. This is done in the United States and actually even more so in Italy through our office in Florence. This is called Speak Truth to Power. So if anyone is interested in this, please visit our website or talk to us after this panel. And another main element I just want to mention here is the Training Institute, of which I'm just a recently and very newly appointed director, which is based here in Florence and which has the aim in training for human rights. On the one hand, human rights activists, including on how to use digital instruments in their campaign, in their struggle for human rights. Training for professionals, that ranges from physicians to journalists to lawyers and anyone else, any other profession that actually needs to understand better human rights. And we will also work with governments and non-governmental organizations in order to advance human rights observance in various parts of the world on various topics. So again, thank you very much for coming, and we will have, I'm sure, a very interesting panel.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank to everybody who's here. I'll be showing myself for the first time here, and then I will disappear behind the podium here. My name is Tedeschini Lalli. I'm a journalist. I'm an Italian journalist. I'm right now the Deputy Director for Innovation and Development of Gruppo Espresso La Repubblica. And I'm very glad to have been invited to moderate this panel. I will now introduce our panelists, and
the idea here, as far as I can understand, is to discuss whether and how, or also whether, since our friend Vittorio Longhi here has expressed some doubts about the power of the internet and the digital media in this respect, how internet and the digital media can help grassroots and organizations or individuals who want to fight or advocate for human rights and all the things that can be done or not done with these instruments. I think the best way to go along would be for our friends to perhaps have a few minutes to explain what they're doing and perhaps have the first to the basic question of whether the digital tool, and especially social media, can help their efforts. And then after this, we will open the floor and for questions, and we will debate further on this. And let me introduce to you our guests. And of course, on the left is Vittorio Longhi, whom you just heard in his keynote. He's a journalist and is editor of Equal Times, the website that he just showed you, and he works for, he writes mainly about the rights of working people. And then we have Rana Husseini. She's a journalist. She's a Jordanian journalist, and she's involved with the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Human Rights, and she has exposed in her work the huge problem of so-called honor killings, where women are killed supposedly to keep the honor of their respective families because they were raped. She received a number of journalistic awards, and I'm very happy that she's with us. And next to her, it's Stephan Bradberry. He won the 2005 RFK Human Rights Award for human rights. And he works, he's a social worker. Well, in terms, I'm sorry, I think I just used the Italian expression for that. He's been advocating for the rights of the people of the most poor sections of New Orleans after the Katrina hurricane that destroyed large swaths of the cities, and he managed to put up a coalition called the Golf Course Civic Works Campaign to gather strength and campaign for the rights of these people. And then on my left, I have Chris Michael, who's an educator and trainer, a videographer, and a human rights advocate, and he was, I understand, the founder of Hub, which is which is a platform within witness.org, again, a website and a platform for people to share and learn how to do videos and that witness, that bear witness to important social happenings and to share them with others. So I think we can start with Rana, perhaps. Well, yeah, we go this way. Vittorio already had his keynote, and perhaps 10 minutes or whatever.
Thank you very much for this lovely introduction, and thank you all for showing up. I want to talk a bit about my work. I'm a journalist, human rights activist. I've been reporting on the issue of so-called honor crimes, violence against women, for the past 18 years for the English daily, the Jordan Times. I have to admit that things were different before the internet, because basically I was only depending on reporting these cases that basically It's not only if a woman gets raped. There are several reasons why women get killed: for tarnishing their honor and reputation, for financial reasons, for becoming pregnant out of wedlock. So there are several reasons why women get killed. So at that time, really, nobody was talking about the issue. It was taboo. But the Jordan Times and myself, we took it upon ourselves to report these murders. So basically, I was just documenting the murders in the newspaper. That was until maybe, when the internet started, things started to change. I don't know, maybe I have to disagree with you, because I think the internet did a lot of things in terms of reporting, in terms of exposing violations, especially in our part of the world. It started a revolution. And it's still going on in several countries. For example, in Jordan, people depend a lot on Facebook. There's a lot of groups. Even there's a group that was opened 3 years ago to address the issue of so-called honor crimes. So it changed from being just a single reporter who's reporting in the Jordan Times to a group that is basically trying to advocate against this issue. And there are hundreds and hundreds of groups. There are groups that are calling for reforms. There are groups that are opposing the regime. So all this is relatively new to us, but people are really using it, to express themselves. And this is something we would have never dreamed of in the past. And of course, there's also the use of Twitter, but I feel from my experience that the use of the Facebook is much higher. For example, another thing, the internet helped us in understanding and realizing people's ideas and thoughts. Before, when it was only paper and you're reporting, you get some letters to the editor. Now, everybody can voice their opinion about stories. And you can tell people's direction, how they think. For example, in the issue of so-called honor crimes, because there has been a lot of exposure, a lot of work. Now we can tell from people's reaction that they are really rejecting. There are more voices, of course. There are still people who support these murders, but you feel that the voices that are rejecting these murders are more. People can express their ideas very freely in terms of social issues. Now, other things, it's a different story. But this is something I think that we wouldn't have dreamed of in the past. So to answer the first question, I don't want to talk a lot so that I give my colleagues more time, and I'm sure there's going to be more questions. But I think in our part of the world, it really helped. In Egypt, it started with a group on Facebook, and the whole regime was toppled. So I think in our part of the world, it's playing some role. I don't know, maybe in the US or elsewhere, it's different. But that's how I see it, for the past 2 years now.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Bradberry, and right now I have an organization, the Alliance Institute, which has been working very hard with the Robert F. Kennedy Center in the U.S. To open up a series of health centers across the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, following the BP oil spill that occurred in 2010. Prior to that, I worked for the largest grassroots community-based organization in the United States, ACORN, which was taken down. And when I say taken down, I mean it was crushed. And I'm going to get a little bit into that because I think there's a social media aspect to that. And I think it was very interesting as we listened to Vittorio speak, because at lunch we began the conversation, and it seemed very much if you had been sitting at the table with us. For me, I think it's not so much whether or not, in and of itself, social media is neither good nor bad. It is a tool that can be utilized. And I think that the warning that Vittorio put out to us about it being used for capitalistic purposes is one that definitely needs to be noted. And as I think about historically, if we want to look at precedents, the spread of the television, as television began to become widespread in the United States of America, was quite around the same time as we spoke about at lunch, that the telephone began to be spread into households across the U.S. And those two forms of new technology helped to spread the civil rights movement. As the images were captured and played out on the news, it caused people who were not subject to it prior to realize the horrors that were going on in their own country, and they helped to push the United States government to pass laws to help protect the disenfranchised, the African Americans at that time. And in today's world, I think it's a very similar situation that's occurring with the YouTube in particular as relates to the television, and Facebook being more along the lines, Facebook and Twitter being more along the lines of the usage of the telephone. But one of the things I think that we should note is that following the civil rights movement, whenever there were other uprisings in the United States, it was not covered in the same manner, because a lesson was learned by the powers that be about covering all of the stories and allowing people to connect that there is in fact a movement going on, that my concerns in my state, there's someone in another state who has those same concerns, and if we know about it, we'll get together and force change. And so when we spoke about earlier, when the Rodney King and the LA riots in the 90s, there were other cities that had riots spring up. Could you just sure. Sure. In the early days of YouTube, a video was captured of police in Los Angeles beating a gentleman just ruthlessly. And his case became nationally known, and the police were acquitted. They were all found not guilty. And he was a black man, and they were all white cops. Thank you. And a riot sprung up, but not just in LA. It also occurred in Houston, Texas, and Detroit, Michigan. But the news did not report those other riots because they did not want to see what had occurred in prior history during civil rights when they showed everything that was happening. And so as we find ourselves with this new technology, the use of YouTube in terms of showing what has been occurring, whether it be Arab Spring or the Occupy movement in the United States, or the use of Facebook, I think we do need to be very careful, not just about how we use it, but about how others are using it. Because in the case of my former employer, it was heavily edited YouTube videos that created a storm of disapproval, and the government moved to run the organization out of business. But what is important to note is that going into that 2008 election, the organization had registered some 2 million people to vote who had never participated before. And if you're watching the American election cycle right now, you know that there is one of the bigger issues is this move to deprive people of the right to participate in the election. And so I'm very much aware of how it works in both ways, that there can be benefits if communities understand and know how to use it in order to get their word and their story out and to connect with others of like mind. But we also have to be very cautious about how those same tools can be used to bring an end to what we are trying to do, or how those same tools can be used simply to move us more into a commercialized herd-like mentality. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Buonasera a tutti. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And I'm going to build off of what Stephen was talking about. In 1992, the Rodney King incident actually inspired the founding of the organization I work for, which is Witness. Witness is based in the United States. And the videotape that was mentioned was shot across the street by a citizen. And he had the Handycam. Do you remember the Handycam, that first video camera that was somewhat affordable for those that had resources? That was 20 years ago. And the organization was founded with the idea that we can give video cameras to people that are facing human rights abuses. They can document those abuses. The world will see them, and then the abuses will stop or they will limit, right? This was 20 years ago, and it's the same challenge because it's a new tool in an environment where you're trying to create human rights change. It doesn't happen just through the tool, but the strategic use of the tool for a specific purpose. And I think that's what we're learning now. How many of you, I'm going to ask you to raise a few hands here. How many of you have watched a video on YouTube? One video, okay. Yeah, just one video. Okay. How many of you have watched a video about what's happening in Syria? Okay. How many of you have seen a video translated of a personal story from a Syrian saying what's happening in Syria? Right. How many of you have seen one in Italian? Right. Very few. The point I'm trying to make is that with these new tools, the intended audience is what matters the most. And so over the past 20 years, Witness as an organization, we've worked in 86 countries, and we've partnered with 350 human rights groups and organizations on specific campaigns. And in that process, what we've learned is that it's very important to integrate these new tools strategically into existing campaigns and advocacy efforts to create specific change. And just because you have the opportunity to document doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to change anything in real terms. It's not going to necessarily create change. However, because so many people are documenting, we are in a beautiful time in which seeing is not only believing, but we also are able to act and communicate with people that are directly affected. We can have solidarity movements and we can organize and support each other. That's a very powerful aspect. So for Witness, what we do is we train human rights activists how to safely and effectively use video as a tool for documentation. So that's not only just how to film and edit, but how to use video into a campaign. But what we're seeing and where we're focusing, and I think this is important for our conversation today, are what are the new safety and security challenges that are happening because people are putting photos, text, and video up online, and they're losing control over it. So for example, in Iran during the Green Revolution, the Iranian government was capturing YouTube videos, taking still shots of those videos and putting red circles around faces. And they put those faces up on their own website. This is a government website. And they were crowdsourcing information, asking citizens, tell us who this person is, where they work, where their family lives, and you'll be rewarded. And Bahrain as well. And this is a trend that as we get exposed to new tools, we have, most of us in our pockets, we have photo capability and probably video on our mobile phones. And that's only going to increase. But how do we use that not only strategically, but also ethically? How do we consider when we put something, a violation, say a police officer is beating someone, how do we make sure that we protect that person's identity or the people that are around? And this is one thing we're doing, and I'm going to share 3 quick points on this. The first one is it's really important for us as human rights advocates that are advocating for using these tools to share best practices. So how to film, how to use documentation. And the main thing here is that there isn't a universal standard from our work for video for all the courts. One of the first international criminal court case against Thomas Lubanga just finished, and he was found guilty, and video was a major component of that work to document how he inscripted and put children on the front lines in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Video was used in that court case because the people who shot the video were able to go into the prosecutor's office and keep that direct chain. But now, when you upload anonymously online, you lose some of that specific date, the time, and the location. This is extremely important throughout the Middle East and North Africa, where we've seen the ongoing revolutions. But when we look at Syria, and particularly today, how we use video documentation as a tool for human rights evidence is of great import. The second is Witness is building a tool that, as you film with your mobile phone, you can blur the faces in real time. And this is a safety and security measure. If we think of doing an interview with someone that's been directly affected by from a human rights violation that is giving a testimony, we might want to blur their face, and we don't want to jeopardize them or put them at risk when we put it online, but we can have a blurred face. So we have an application on a mobile phone that basically is showing best practices in protecting individuals' safety and security. And the third is, how can the companies that we all use, YouTube, our Nokia phones, our Samsungs, etc., how can those companies be held more accountable to create those spaces? They are companies. It's a capitalist market. There's no doubt about it. However, they can be pushed, and campaigns can be won where we can actually get them to do better for human rights advocates and for people. And one example that we've been part of is YouTube now has, when you upload, you can actually, before it goes public, you can blur faces in your video. This is something from the human rights community we've been asking for because very few of us have editing tools on our computers. It's very expensive. These tools are still very expensive for most of us in the world. But YouTube did say, okay, we'll do that. We'll create a blurring tool because we know that that's in the best interest to protect people. And one of the things that I think we can consider is, how do we strategically get the companies that have the materials that we use to create content, to advocate, to text message, etc., how do we make those more safe and secure for all of us and for the social change that we're part of? So that's my end remark, and I will pass the baton.
Okay, there's lots of things to discuss about, and of course, if anybody from the audience is willing to chip in, have a question, or just want to, give his or her opinion, please feel free. And I perhaps stand, so it's easier. You can see me so it's better. And I will repeat this in Italian just to be sure. Chiunque voglia alza la mano, si fa vedere, si muove, viene, parla e discute. Quindi siamo a disposizione. I think one of the interesting things that emerged in this first round, and perhaps Vittorio can join us now for the other rounds, is that perhaps if I can translate something that I heard, is that the digital tools we all use and the internet somehow opened up a number of possibilities for niches, small groups, individuals. Now, of course, there are good niches, good individuals, as well as bad niches and bad individuals. And, hate speech is there. And of course, if it's easier to communicate human rights values, it's just as easy to communicate hate, racism, whatever. Which, of course, is one of the main argument that politicians and controllers all over the world put forward to say, well, perhaps we should begin to control these tools. Isn't this isn't this a political problem of some sort?
This is a challenge. This is the actual challenge that we face today. Let me just reply that I totally agree with the three of you. The creative, strategic, and ethic use of net is what we aim to. It's what we can potentially do. No question, no doubt about that. But this can be done up until and as far as internet is really free. And by free, I mean independent and free of charge. Because if you start to have, you can regulate it, and you can raise the issue of what should be shown, what should be shared or not. But, it's quite risky, it's quite edgy. And also, you could have a good potential for participation and for change, for the defense and protection of human rights and any other kind of social right, promotion of social rights and human rights, if audiences are not commodified. Because what's happening today is that we try to make a good use of the web, of social networks, But these networks, they only aim to commodify the audiences, and this is ongoing, and you cannot help it. I mean, it's not just a kind of capitalistic environment. It's beyond that. It's a kind of total control. So even though we have experience, and we still experience it, and we make an excellent use of the web, still we have the problem of the commodification of the audiences. Data trade, anything. And you have the illusion, and especially very young people tend to have the illusion of control over their Facebook profiles, Twitter accounts, and websites, blogs. And so, yeah, it is an extraordinary tool for democracy, for participation. But privatization of internet, there's far better than me, started in the mid-90s in the US, and is still going on. And this further attempt to retrench the access and have more and more control by some governments, like China, like Iran, like Jordan or other Middle Eastern countries. I was in Bahrain, and I totally agree with you on the use that the authorities, that police can do of some kind of naive activist, which is not supposed to be naive. And that's the way police used the videos there. 34 people were killed during the protests in Bahrain, in Manama, just because they were traced by videos. So again, what are the constraints? What are the challenges? How far can we say that we are entirely independent? And again, the first of our fights should be to keep the net free. Keep the net free.
I want to add to your comments, because in Jordan now it's going backwards, unfortunately. The government has introduced laws that would basically control what the electronic media is reporting, and they have the authority to shut down or prosecute electronic media owners, So that's been a big debate in Jordan. There's been a lot of protests about that. And now, they started this campaign against pornography sites like few months ago. And now the government is going to install a new program whereby they can filter. People can still go to pornography sites, but we all know that it's not for pornography. It's to control other things. But they're, putting this pornography issue as an excuse. So basically, my colleague explained to me in the newspaper that there's this new program. The government can know everything. Anything you log into, they will have access to it. They will know what you're doing, what you're surfing, and all of that. So basically, this is, it's a big struggle. It's a challenge. People are annoyed, upset, and they've done a lot, but nothing is happening. And the law, that it was endorsed by the king recently. So basically, unfortunately, because of the Arab Spring, so-called Arab Springs, and everything that's going on, now there's going to be control of the media. And I have a feeling that some Arab countries might go by it if they haven't already adopted something like that. So that's a big challenge. And at the same time, you raise the point whereby I don't feel that a lot of the internet owners are ethical. There's also misuse of electronic media sites. They try to blackmail people. They go to companies. If you don't advertise, then they start writing bad things about this company. So really, it's a big dilemma. Where do you draw the line? So I think that's to add to your concerns.
I would just, and I certainly agree with those, but I think there's also another concern in that we're beginning to give too much credence to the internet and to these various social media tools. And I'd like to think about books, right? Books, as people begin to get these book reading things and more books are put online. The other side of that is that there are many books that will never go online. And as people move away from that, and because of the algorithms that are used to target you for commercialism, for the purchasing of products, the less likely it is you will run into information that will force you to think out of your current mode of thinking, to expand your awareness and to learn about new things. Because the way that these social media sites are set up is as a marketing site to take all of the information that you put in so that they can then sell that information so that people who have products can target to you specifically because you like the way jasmine smells and blue is your favorite color and you like to watch whatever television show. But as that happens more and more, and as one of the phenomena with Facebook is that your friend list, even though you may have 5,000 friends, only those with whom you have the most in common are the ones who are going to continually be put in front of you. People in general will become less and less challenged about what they think and believe. And that leads us into a backwards motion where people then move into a very tribalistic way of thinking and a zero-sum approach to the world.
Yeah. This point, I mean, we have universal human rights. And I think one of the new campaigns that we're going to see is the call for the internet being a universal human right, because it's the primary conduit, it's the primary way that we can get information quickly and accessible in this way. And I think that is an exciting thing for those of us that want a free and open society. For the commercialism of the social network sites, I think the reality is we know that exists, and once you start using it, you realize that it exists. But I would encourage us to focus more on the exciting aspects of successful projects like Global Voices, all of the various microblog and community centers, where as these communities are starting to have the opportunity to amplify their voice, not looking for a reporter from a foreign country to say what they want or what they need or what they're thinking, but to speak for themselves, that is what we should celebrate. And the key things, in my view, is how do we make sure that the people that are living in environments where the governments are silencing them have more projects like Tor and more other tools that do circumvention to... Oh, I'm sorry, yes. So for in environments in which the internet is blocked or silenced in certain ways by governments, because for those of us, it's key to remember each nation state controls its own internet for its population, right? And so governments can block websites and block access. And because of that, smart technologists created tools like Tor, which is an application that you can download on your computer that enables you, in simple terms here, to connect, and your internet access goes actually outside of the country to another series of computers that enables you to get around the block that the government has created. These tools are going to happen more and more. And I think what we're going to see are more social community sites and networking sites that are built to really serve populations that are in solidarity. I think we're going to see global sites that are working on forced evictions, that are working on gender-based violence, that are working on housing issues. Because the internet is malleable, you can adapt and you can change it. But the thing is that if we don't know our audiences and we aren't using the use of the internet in a strategic way or any tools, then it's just dropping content at one drop in an ocean. It's lost. It has no purpose. This is my perspective, and this is our methodology. So being strategic makes the difference. And I think we should celebrate that people have amplified voices now, and we can read from one person's perspective in different parts of the world from their viewpoint rather than having the filter. And that's something that we're going to see more of, and that we need to support the tools that ensure the safety and people know how to use these tools safely and effectively, but also how we amplify those voices and encourage and breathe fire into that. So.
Domande, questions? Coraggio. Prego. Oh, please.
Okay. Can I ask Chris a question and the other panelists? You mentioned about how Witness gave out cameras as a way of trying to observe and presumably prevent abuses of human rights around the world. And as you mentioned now, that's much more easier now that you have phones with cameras and that everyone has access to a little video recorder. Do you think that worked? Do you think that there are massacres that might have taken place, there are individuals who might have been attacked, there are people who might have been falsely arrested or whatever, who, as a result of that sort of bearing video witness, that you've protected them? And I suppose in a rather bigger way, do you think that, even though we've heard some concerns about the misuse of the internet and technology, that in fact, are you optimistic that this might prevent some of the sort of darker parts of our history in terms of, could Stalin have run his purges if people had YouTube? Could Hitler have run camps if there had been someone there with an iPhone recording what was happening?
I'll take the first, yeah. Thanks for the question. I think Syria, in one word, no, right? We've seen a regular documentation of the Assad regime bombarding its people for the past 18, 19 months. And there's no shortage of content documenting that. Journalists weren't allowed in. They had very hard time getting in. But where we're at today is the Syrian video activists are showing the world how to be regular documenters and taking the risks to ensure that the world sees what's happening. So sadly, I don't think we're at a place in which just having a mobile phone is going to stop abuse. But we are in a place where people are certainly, and governments are mindful of the fact that the world will see eventually, if not immediately with live streaming tools, what's happening. But again, it comes down to that challenge of how do you ensure that your content is going to be seen? And this gets into when you'll see on YouTube a bunch of videos, MOV number 14, for example. If you're not from Homs, you don't know that shelling took place on that date at that intersection and specific location. So what we've seen, and sadly, because Syria has been bombarded for so long, is how people have been training each other through the use of social media, showing good examples of documenting casualties and injuries to make sure that content can be used in future tribunals and hopefully for accountability, but also so journalists can use it and have veracity in it. I think that's very important. And just having the tool does not create the change. But we are seeing, and we're learning from each other. We're all learning from Syrians, and we've learned from throughout Middle East and North Africa. But, we're seeing burgeoning democracies in the use of these tools. So it's a constant growth, but unfortunately we're not in a place where the technology is going to stop the violations, certainly not. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree that the technology in and of itself doesn't create the change. Even within the United States, as people began to videotape more of the cases of police brutality and police misconduct, localities began to change laws, making it illegal to videotape the police. But because of the ongoing organizing and advocating efforts, and then using that to take it to court so that it could be seen why it is valuable that someone documents police activity, right? That someone be free to document police activity has begun to create some of that change. But it's not the tool itself that is the valuable piece in it. It is the tool which is allowing people to organize in a more effective way. And I think in both of these situations, that's what's highlighted. I know for me, more than anything that I think people need to get out of this conversation is that good organizing, good advocacy is what it is. The tool in and of itself won't do much. It's only as it is utilized by those people who are organizing and advocating that make it a useful tool. Because the one video in and of itself does not create the change. It is when people realize that it's a powerful tool and begin to train one another in how to use it, that it proliferates and helps to highlight the value of the messages that are coming through, which is where the change occurs.
Well, just to go back to Syria, as you said, it's people there are risking their lives, taking clips of what's going on, and we've seen them on Al Jazeera My name is so and so. Today is so and so. I'm in this place. This is what's happening. This couldn't have happened long time. In the past, probably this person will vanish. So maybe let's say the positive thing about all this, of course, everything is happening in Syria is horrible, but the positive thing is that people now have the chance to talk and to transmit, even if it's not going to make a difference, but at least it's being documented, and that's very, very important. You never know what happens in the future, but this thing could have never happened before. It's happening now. People are seeing in our part of the world, people... Anyways, in terms of Syria, people are divided. There are people who are with the regime, people who are against the regime. But regardless, the fact that there are videos that are being done by individuals, mobile, whatever, this is something new. This is something very important. Maybe not now, but in the future, it's going to make a difference, I think.
Yes, indeed. I'd like to underline what you said about mutual use, cross-training, and any kind of activity that could really empower peoples and countries and contexts, environments where there is no, let's say, technological expertise or knowledge. Let me add that we live and we experience a big imbalance, a big digital divide geographically and socially, and this mutual use should try to balance somehow this big, huge divide between also the global north and the global south, geographically, economically, but also the big divide, the big social divide in terms of access to the web within societies, even in our countries, in industrialized, advanced economies, meaning the US, Europe, and in other industrialized countries. So I believe much in that, but again, the use of tools, we should focus on ways to somehow resist and keep open source going, because open source is so much relevant in terms of mutual aid and sharing, which the big companies, and we all know the cases of Microsoft and so on, wouldn't allow for many reasons.
Questo a disposizione. Anyone? Right, I'll have some. As I told you, I'm a journalist. In fact, as you see from my black hair, I'm a quite old journalist, and which means that I had a whole professional life before I turned to digital 15 years ago. And people like me have had quite a hard time adjusting, and we didn't even actually adjust it as a whole. We began to learn that our work was not supposed to be a lecture anymore, but was supposed to be a conversation. Of course, journalists do not actually converse. They did not actually discuss with their public, or at least they didn't. We were not required. Now, it was painful, but journalists all over the world are trying somehow to make sense of this whole thing and try to engage somehow in conversations. Otherwise, they would be just shunted out of the conversation itself. Now, some of you are journalists, but here you are on this theater as human rights activists. So you have a cause. You have a good cause, of course. Everybody loves good causes. And I wonder whether, generally speaking, or personally speaking, depending on how you want to take this question, maybe for good causes, are we still at the broadcast level instead at the conversational level? Are we at the point where we still have a message to get through, instead of just, participate?
I think it's both of them. Initially, it is at the broadcast stage, right? In terms of getting your message out with the hopes that it turns into a conversation. Certainly, if you're an organization such as mine that is working on issues in response to whatever's going on, or if you're working on a movement, then it is of great value to get your message out, right? And in fact, to get your message out early and very clear so that you can frame the conversation that's going to take place. Because if you don't, and this is actually what happened in the case of my former employer, someone else created the frame through which the conversation was had, and as a result, the organization was not able to respond with its own story so that people could hear what it had to say. That frame had been created by someone else because they didn't control the broadcasting of the message. And so I know for what we have learned, and I think as I gave the example of the powers that be following the civil rights movement in the news, they realize that you have to cover the broadcast, the initial whoever gets the story out first, and in the best way controls the conversation. And so I think in a lot of what's occurring now in the world of social media with organizations that are working on civil rights, human rights, et cetera, is really trying to make sure they get that message out. And I would say that even particularly in the case, it was interesting when Rana was saying she doesn't know if those individual videos that are coming out, what effect they're having. I would say that they're having a very dramatic effect because they are compounding a situation. And I know that there would not be a conversation happening at the presidential level and the debates and things like that in the United States if your average citizen were not seeing those videos played on Facebook and YouTube and et cetera. So it is about getting that message out there so that it can guide the conversation.
So we're all humans, and that's not a surprise. Yeah, but a couple things I think are interesting. Researchers are really focusing on the power of storytelling, and we all absorb information through stories. That's how we have been brought up over time, and what makes a compelling campaign is a great story that shows right and wrong, and that invites people in to be part of that story to create change. So the role of a journalist in terms of the broadcast versus a conversation, I think our job as advocates is how do you compellingly tell a good story that's truthful and honest and ethical that invites people to participate in the change that we're creating. And if we can't relate to the story, then we turn off the channel. If we can't relate to the person who's speaking, we turn it off. And I think the challenge is how do we have messages and people giving those messages that relate to the audience so they pay attention and they want to be part of the story and be part of the change. That's the challenge. And I think today, journalists actually are probably reading more than ever because you have to be part of the constant dialogue on Twitter and other spaces or else you become behind or obsolete. I think it's a big challenge for journalists, and I'd love to hear on your thoughts as a journalist on this.
Exactly what you're saying. I mean, for me, I read every day like 20 or 30 news sites in Jordan because, each tells a different story. But what stopped me really, your sentence about saying something and right and wrong. And this is what I've been doing all my life. And I feel that you don't have to, actually, you just have to tell the story. And then that's it, A lot of people would ask me in my work if I exaggerate, because, it's stories of victims being killed for me, unjust reasons, for the society, not always. So for me, it's just to tell the story, it's enough. It's enough to tell the story. No need add anything. Of course, we're not supposed to add, but this is what people always come to me and ask me. And sometimes they talk about the fact that you're a journalist and you're a human rights activist, and does this contradict your work? And it's a tough question, but at the same time, I always say you just have to tell the truth, you know. And it's shocking enough, I think.
That's because journalists are supposed to be cynical and have no interest for human rights. Now, let me just start by saying that I wouldn't call you an old journalist, but a kind of digital immigrant. Yeah, because we're all more or less digital immigrants. If you're not an under 20s, I mean, we are all. If you're not a digital native, you are, as a matter of fact, a digital immigrant. On journalism, I would say that, yeah, internet and blogging especially, and the level of interaction and participation changes the very nature of journalism and turns traditional journalism into open journalism, of course. And, you know, the text now is not what you release and what you publish, what you post anymore. This is just the beginning of the story. And then you will wait for follow-ups. There is no online journalist today that is happy with what is written or she has written and is posted there, because you start waiting for comments and replies and feedback and so on. And this changes let's say, the political and social role of journalists, like you challenge the role of politicians, because it's about devolution of power. So you're devolving a part of your power to do communication, to do information to other people. And this is very much challenging for a journalist. And these need some reorganizing in the way you work, in the way you conceive yourself as someone who actually spreads to the world his knowledge, his competence, and so on. So I would say there is an open process, it's not a closed process anymore, and it is challenging, but it can be very much rewarding, because you're just a kind of a facilitator of content. You're not just a creator of content, just like politicians have to deal with participatory democracy. So let's say that we are challenged by participatory information.
Well, as far as my age is concerned, I'm among people who actually, at the beginning, I actually spliced 16 millimeters film and audio tape, right? And actually punched on a telex machine to find my story. So that's how young I am. Let's take this from, I don't want to discuss journalism here. I mean, we are discussing human rights activism and digital human rights activism, right? So let's put the same question on a more technical, less theoretical way. Should digital activists focus more on the product, be it a video or, you know, a story, a written story, whatever, or should they also engage in curation? This is, again, one of the issues that are being discussed among journalists. I mean, we are communicators anyway, right? So how much should a digital activist curate other people's output? And are you doing so?
I'll start because we have a big project. This is a big decision for us as an organization. So Witness has been around for 20 years. We've worked with hundreds of partners. And the reality is that human rights activists use YouTube as their primary portal to share video content. Now, there are a lot of things that if I was the CEO of YouTube, there are a lot of things I would change, for sure. That would make it better for human rights activists. One of which is the blurring tool. But another one is having a curated space that is for human rights media. And over time, what we've have a collaboration with YouTube and Storyful that is just that, where it's called youtube.com/human rights. And it's a channel of user-generated content where what we're doing is we're contextualizing the content to help the viewers see in a series of playlists related content, be it from a bombing in Syria, a series of bombings from different angles, various attacks, police brutality in the United States, etc. And I think where we're at is that there's so much content out there. What's so important is that those that have the familiarity of the issue or of the region or the specific context take the time to kind of create a present for the viewer or for the reader that says, this is why it's important, we've made a decision on this is what you should see, and we want you to share it and amplify this content to make sure it's seen. So I think where we're going is those of us that aren't on the front lines of human rights challenges and efforts can play a role in being in support of trying to make sure that all of that content gets boiled down to the societies that really very few people spend hours on end watching numerous videos in YouTube. You might be able to get their attention for 45 seconds or for a minute and a half. That's the world many of us live in. So curation is so important for that. So that's an example of an organization of 20 years making a decision. We're going to continue training and supporting our partners, but another role we need to play is creating a space in this big house on the web, YouTube, for a focused, dedicated, curated space for human rights.
Yeah, I mean, I would look at it from the other side of it, right? I'm not a journalist. Every now and then I might write a blog or something, but even that is fairly rare. And so for me and the folks that I work with, it really is more about strategy. How does it fit into our strategy? Is it the best tactic for getting a message out or for influencing a message? And in as much as, and right now I would say that there's a severe lack of training and the necessary partnerships in order to do what you're speaking of. But I think it's a direction that we're moving towards, and as that occurs, I think we'll begin to see more of the type of movements you spoke of a little while ago, where you're linking worldwide interests, whether it be rights to housing or education or access to clean water even. Because as it occurs now, these are happening in disparate locations, and so the people in rural Louisiana don't even see their water issue connected to the folks in California, let alone how that relates to what's going on in Africa or other places around the world. And as we begin to have this information in locales that then organizations can pull and share with one another, we'll begin to see that type of massive push, because essentially, as you said, human rights is a universal right that transcends national boundaries. And as groups begin to get that information and know how to use it and work together, I think we'll see more of that occurring.
I don't want to talk a lot because they said a lot of things, but I think if human rights activists should use any mean to transmit their, work, their cause, be it video, be it in writing, I think you have to use any kind, because now there's a lot of things out there, and you cannot just come and say, I'm going to focus on YouTube. Sometimes some people will not use YouTube. They will use something else. They will use Facebook. So I think we have to use all means to spread the message and not just focus on one thing.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And on your question about the product or the story, the tool, the mean you use, what I can say as a journalist who has to make editorial choices, you try to make the best use of the tools you have, and there are quite a few now. So apart from videos and audio clips and text, you have infographics, for instance, which is amazingly catchy and innovative and time effective in terms of communication. But you tend to balance, between the importance of the story and the tool that you're going to use, since you start by considering the fact that you have a platform nowadays. You have a multimedia tool that allows you to do many things, but you have to focus on the product and on the tool. So regardless of the story, sometimes the tool really matters in terms of effectiveness of how the story will be reported or will be shared. Personally, I tend to ask for video clips because they're so much effective. And we started using a lot of infographics, animation and infographics, because it really helps to simplify complex issues. And you know, when you're, as a journalist or an activist, when your aim is to draw people's attention and turn that attention into action, you have to mix information and action, and you have to turn that interest into something more concrete. And for instance, mobile phones, smartphones, what is called the third screen, is amazingly powerful, and there's a huge potential there for campaigning, because with a click on your mobile, on your smartphone, you can really sign petitions, you can take action, you can really do much. And it's just simple as that. It's like ordering a book on Amazon, but done for good reasons.
We have still 10 minutes to go. Questions? Come ahead.
I would like to. I was actually thinking about the very interesting topics that we've been covering today. That you've been covering today. But my question was actually talking about digital activism. For what I know, one of the very critical points, critical debates that there always been, is where is the actual border between the two different directions in which I think activism is actually directed, which are information and engagement. So where actually the whatever kind of activism is capable of getting other people to be involved and to engage with a specific issue. And especially online, this becomes a very critical point, because obviously there are even people that created this new fancy little word, which is slacktivism, the idea that online the only way that people really get involved is only clicking on, yes, I believe in that on Facebook, and then click on and get to the next page. So my question is, how do you think that online the dynamics of moving people from actually, rather than just informing them, how is actually possible to get them to engage? Because this is probably also one of the critical limits of what happened really during the so-called Arab revolutions, whether people just got informed through the World Wide Web or actually got engaged and decided to move to the streets or not to actually join the protest. Because one of the very few, at least lately, one of the very few cases in which using social media, somebody's been capable of getting people really engaged is a case that created so much debate, which is obviously the Coney 2012, which obviously even using fake information and no, the idea is how is it possible without ending up in sensationalism, which is basically what the Coney movie did, how actually can or cannot social media create a real engagement and push people to actually really engage with specific issues?
So once again, I really just have to fall back on the fact that it is a tool that is to be used. Certainly, if you have a situation where you need bodies to be in a place, it may not be the best tool. On the other hand, whereas Facebook may not be the best way to get people to show up at a place, Twitter may be a highly effective way of letting people know that something is going to happen very shortly. Because one of the concerns when you have those types of actions is that there's a leak and something is done in order to thwart your efforts. And so in that type of a case, a Twitter message that's going out maybe an hour before the event is going to happen becomes a very effective tool. Slacktivism I suppose it would depend on what the issue is. An example that I use in training folks just around power mapping in the United States, you have the Fox News network, which represents the very conservative right-wing ideologies. And you had, the lead right-wing nut, if you will, Glenn Beck, who was really kind of, pulling in religious ideologies and just conspiratorial things and just weaving them all together into this demonization of, the American president, liberals, and just really out there. And there was an organization, change.org, which ran an online campaign, which basically just called people to do an online petition that would go not just to Fox News, but more importantly to their advertisers, which resulted in the advertisers pulling their support from the show, which caused Glenn Beck to then be taken off the air. And so in that type of a case, it was not necessary to have bodies in a place. All that was necessary to bring that about was the slacktivism. So I think it's just a matter of noting what the values of the tools are and how to best utilize them.
I think we can, if I may, just one last one. I was going to mention the Coney 2012 because, you're talking about stories. Don't talk about stories to me. I love stories. I've been writing stories all my life, right? But that was a great story. It was a great film, a great video, greatly produced. But is that the kind of digital activism we are looking for? That was, my thing. But then I'll if you want, you can skip that one. But the one thing is, I wonder, in this new communication environment that all of us have to take, into account. People, organizations can speak for themselves and make, the public aware of the causes. Is that enough for the agenda setting, or is it still necessary somehow to have, old mass media organizations somehow pitching in with their strength?
You guys should start one of these.
Well, again, yeah, but just like in the case of Tunisia and Egypt, it was the big networks who legitimated the social networks, and they legitimated the state media, the state-owned media. To answer your question, you still need the big mainstream, powerful networks in order to extend and enhance the message you want to deliver. But the story is still so central, is still essential. And you cannot turn that around. You need good stories. And for activism, of course, you need a story that can draw attention and turn that into action.
I agree, because in the Arab world, most people watch two main news channels, Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya. And obviously they're making a difference because, for example, in Syria, they scramble the channels. You cannot see them, and in some countries also. So this means when the government scrambles or tries to prevent these channels, prevent people from seeing it, this means that it's making an impact.
A little bit. I work with video, so I've got some thoughts on the Coney 2012. But the element of journalism in your industry, it's shrinking in many ways. The resources, the foreign bureaus, those that are invested in certain towns and cities that are reporting. So we don't. That's a whole separate panel that there are many of them that have occurred. But I think the citizen journalism, and they're working together in many ways, where a lot of the stories you see, we were talking earlier at lunch, how it took a couple weeks for Egypt actually, or Tunisia rather, to get in the mainstream media after, the original self-immolation. So there's an element there. I think when it comes to the story, Kony 2012, for those that aren't familiar, it's the most viewed video in the history of online video. More than Susan Boyle, if you're familiar with this woman. And it was viewed over 100 million times in 6 days. And it's a 25-minute video. This goes exactly counter to what everyone understood to be short videos are the kings. Everyone should only create videos under 30 seconds or 90 seconds. Now, I've been on some panels talking about Kony 2012 because I'm a little bit opinionated, is what we say in the United States. But the thing... Let's explain that was made by an organization in California. Yeah, absolutely, thank you. So the Invisible Children is an organization that's been working on issues in northern Uganda, and the video came out, and it was a beautiful video. I make videos not nearly as good as this. It was a beautiful video. The story was really simple. It was good versus evil. It had very strong elements that us versus them, which resonates for many people. But the Invisible Children organization knew exactly who their audience was. It was teenagers, right? That's who they were trying to target. So they created a story for those individuals. But the point of this is that they created a story that wasn't fully factual. They left out a lot of information, not just a little, a lot. It had very strong elements of racism, and we could talk a lot about the different currents that are in that video from various analysis. But the thing is, it was a shock to them. They were expecting maybe 50,000, 200,000 views. And so my point with this is that when we use storytelling as a tool for social change, we better be factual, and we better be ethical, and we better be responsible. Because once we put it online, or once it has its life of its own, you can't ever take it back. Once I speak and this goes streaming on the web, my words are done, and someone can go in, they can edit it and take it how they want and use it how they want. That's the lesson of Kony 2012. And one of the things of real importance is that, from my understanding in my conversations, the people that have been impacted by Kony, which is a warlord that has been operating especially 6+ years ago in northern Uganda and is now in the DRC and Central African Republic, the people that were affected by Kony weren't asked to see the video before it went public. So when we look at human rights video from witnesses' perspective, if you're creating content and creating stories, then you need to be engaging with those whom are most directly affected and making sure that their voice and what they're asking for, and ideally they're creating and editing the story. That's our methodology. But there are a lot of lessons learned with Kony 2012, and I think we should celebrate those lessons and move them forward as we learn how, because it was the most successful example, and because it was a very good, albeit not totally truthful and accurate story. But it's one we can learn from.
Okay, grazie mille a tutti quanti. Thanks very much for our panelists, for the Robert Kennedy Center for Human Rights, or for organizing this panel, and for the thank you Festival Internet di Pisa, and thank you all.